I think the ridiculous notion is for either one of you all to have the audacity to believe that you understand what the experience is to be.
I have to object to that.
But you just said
I cannot talk about it because I am not part of a group. I am a sentient human being. You're right. There's two ways you cannot understand something. One is to be too far from it. We're too far from it. We can't see like you can. One is to be too close to something. And then sometimes you can't see it accurately either.
It began with a fiery exchange on live television. One participant declared, "You can't truly grasp the challenges of a certain skin color unless you've lived it yourself." The air grew heavier, the tension unmistakable. Normally on TV, people might bow out politely, offer a nod, then move along. But this moment broke that pattern. The reply wasn't long-winded or soft. It was sharp, precise, and cutting. The point was simple. Just as distance can blur your sight, being too close can also blind you.
At the Super Bowl, there, for the first time in, I think, 4 years now, the Trump administration is making them take away "end racism," which they had written in the end zone, right? And when
why? It just seems silly. I mean,
to do it or not to do it?
Why get rid of it?
Oh, I could tell you why.
I know, but it's just like you're...
Because it was stupid to begin with.
Yeah, but it's...
Let me ask you, who's it for? And if you're a racist and you see "end racism" in the end zone, you're going to stop being a racist?
It landed like a sudden jolt, shifting the entire conversation in an instant. Right there on live television, the long-standing idea that only certain people could speak on certain issues was being dismantled. This wasn't a polite back and forth anymore. The very foundation of identity politics was under fire. The reasoning was clear. No matter someone's background, every human has the capacity to think, observe, and express ideas. To suggest otherwise or to bar someone from a discussion solely because of skin color was absurd. It was raw, unscripted, and completely unexpected. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us grow and bring you more powerful stories. And this was only the beginning. What unfolded wasn't just another televised debate mixed with catchy slogans and virtue signaling. It revealed the cracks in the empty political theater the public had been fed for years.
The sentiment is basically like, don't be a...
But I think it's an effort to nag us during a football game about something that doesn't change anything or any. If I'm not a racist and I see it, it doesn't matter. And if I am a racist, it's going to make me more of a racist.
Like, I think if you write "don't be an on the end zone," everybody will agree with that.
Before long, the conversation shifted to something almost everyone could relate to, the NFL. For years, massive words, "end racism," had been painted across end zones meant to deliver a message each time millions tuned in to watch football. But then came the question that unsettled the room. Who was that message really for? Would a slogan written on turf truly convince someone with deep-rooted prejudice to abandon it? And if a fan was already shouting slurs at players during a game, was a painted phrase going to suddenly change their mind? The silence that followed spoke louder than any lecture. The reality became clear. These gestures weren't designed to eliminate racism. They were staged for optics. Oversized words splashed across the field gave leagues and corporations an easy way to pat themselves on the back. The whole thing felt more like a disguised commercial break than genuine progress. Once the question was voiced, the logic collapsed instantly. A single sharp point was enough to puncture all the moral posing and inflated theatrics. Empty slogans don't solve real problems. And what made this moment sting even more was how familiar it sounded. Fans at home had been thinking the same thing for years. These messages don't fix anything. At best, they spark eye rolls.
We would have inquiries. We would request information. We would want cabinet secretaries and assistant secretaries and deputy secretaries to come before committee. We would send letter after letter after letter and get no response. The Biden administration operated literally in the shadows. They would not tell you anything that was going on. At least Donald Trump puts it out in the litany of orders that come out that day. Here's what we're doing today. We're going into the Department of Justice. We are taking these attorneys and they are under supervisory review, or however they choose to phrase it. You knew nothing that was going on in Joe Biden's presidency.
And then someone finally voiced what millions had been thinking on national television, no less. These grand solutions were nothing more than catchphrases. Words painted on a field don't change reality. The guest who tried to defend the slogan leaned on the usual phrases about raising awareness and symbolic gestures, but it didn't take long before she hit a wall. One simple question dismantled her entire position. If it doesn't change behavior, what's the point? She froze. No clever counter, no fiery defense, just silence. And it wasn't the kind of silence that comes from reflection. It was the silence of an illusion crumbling. In that instant, the curtain was pulled back and the truth spilled out. Social media might thrive on snappy hashtags, but real life demands more than catchy words. What stood exposed was sobering. There was no deeper plan, no practical roadmap, just recycled platitudes repeated so often they had lost all meaning. And this wasn't an isolated mistake. It highlighted a broader pattern. Too often, progressive politics fall into the same trap, using slogans as scaffolding for entire campaigns and movements, but never grounding them in tangible action. The result? The moment someone dares to push back, the slogans collapse like a fragile house of cards.
To make fetch happen. What a shocker that the people who see everything through the lens of race and sex see their election loss as a result of racism and sexism. Yes, if only we weren't so irredeemably unenlightened, we would have elected a black president by now. Oh, what, we did? Oh, right, and then re-elected him. Maybe you missed it because it wasn't on TikTok.
This is why the exchange felt so charged. It wasn't just about words on a football field. The real point was exposing a larger pattern, a strategy built on appearances rather than real results. Short as it was, the moment carried the weight of something much bigger. Empty slogans aren't solutions, and people have grown tired of the noise. Then came the spark that lit an even bigger fire: corporate America. For years, major companies had gone out of their way to brand themselves as progressive, Pride Month rainbow logos, hashtags plastered everywhere, carefully worded PR statements declaring solidarity and support. But behind the curtain, the truth was hard to miss. It was all performance. These corporations weren't fighting injustice, they were fighting bad press. Their priority wasn't fairness, but survival, especially survival from angry mobs online. But then something shifted. The slogans and rainbow banners started to fade. Quietly, the corporate morality shows came to an end. Why? Because the fear that once kept executives obedient was fading too. The outrage machine wasn't as powerful as it used to be. CEOs began realizing that chasing applause with slogans was costing them more than it earned. Instead of looking noble, they looked foolish. And so the cycle broke. Racists could be banned from the NFL without painting giant slogans in end zones. The words had never been proof of progress in the first place. They weren't shields against hate. They were cheap distractions, flimsy props that delayed real change.
And sexism? Hillary got 3 million more votes than Trump, which in a normal country would be called a victory. It wasn't... It wasn't 21st century sexism that prevented a woman from being president. It was the Electoral College. Democrats run for office as if the voters don't live here, as if they don't go to the grocery store and Starbucks and the office, but they do. They live here.
Those shields lost their power the moment people stopped believing in them. Corporations that once bent over backward to appease the cultural machine were now quietly backing away. The showy gestures were fading, and it was happening right before everyone's eyes. But just when it seemed the argument was winding down, another layer of hypocrisy came into view. This time, the spotlight turned to politics. The Biden administration came under fire for secrecy and silence. In past administrations, officials had to sit through hearings, answer tough questions, and face constant scrutiny. With Biden, critics argued that openness vanished. Decisions were made behind closed doors. Mail went unanswered. Requests for information were brushed aside. The difference was striking. Previous leaders may have been messy, blunt, or even reckless, but at least the public could see what was happening. Biden's team wrapped everything in spin and silence. Policies were tweaked, rules changed, people dismissed. Yet, the details rarely reached the public. Instead of the promised transparency, the government looked more like a private club, deciding in secret what the people were allowed to know. And that wasn't just bad politics, it was a breakdown of trust. How could leaders claim to represent the people if they refused to face them? Worse still, when the truth did surface, it came buried under stage briefings, scripted answers, and layers of dishonesty. The closer you looked, the less you saw. It felt less like democracy and more like theater. That double standard left viewers with a sobering question: who's really in charge? From there, secrecy gave way to another familiar tactic: identity politics. When female candidates stumbled, critics were accused of sexism. Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, the same script was repeated, yet the numbers told a different story. Hillary didn't lose because she was a woman. She lost the Electoral College despite winning the popular vote. Harris wasn't criticized for her gender. She was criticized for her record. And when you looked closer, the logic collapsed entirely. America had already elected 2 black presidents. That wasn't just symbolic. It proved voters were willing to support candidates of all backgrounds so long as they resonated with the public.
We see women and people of color, and it doesn't look like some patriarchal racist nightmare. Kamala spent 100 days telling voters, I know it feels like crime and illegal immigration are bad, but f your feelings. Look at this chart. Yes, there's a lot to not like already about the new regime, but maybe take 1 week to ask what you did wrong. The basis for Democratic campaigns has become, we're the smart people. That we know from the get.
Gender or race was never the real problem. That was the message. What people cared about were skyrocketing grocery prices, rising crime in the cities, border insecurity, and the crushing weight of everyday expenses. Instead of tackling those issues, Democrats leaned on pronouns, hashtags, and endless conversations about diversity, and people stopped buying it. The truth was plain. Voters didn't reject women or minorities in power. They rejected hollow promises dressed up in identity politics. The failure wasn't the voters, it was the party's refusal to face reality. And that's when arrogance took center stage. A pattern revealed itself. Democrats walked into debates, campaigns, and press conferences convinced they were the smartest people in the room. Anyone who dared to disagree was brushed off as ignorant, backwards, or unworthy of a seat at the table. This wasn't just politics anymore. It was morality cloaked in condescension. They didn't persuade, they lectured, they didn't unify, they shamed. Dissent wasn't debated, it was silenced. And the harder they preached, the less the average American cared to listen. Picture it. You're worried about putting food on the table, then you turn on the news to see politicians debating pronouns and privilege. 2 worlds colliding, one rooted in daily struggles, the other floating in abstraction. And what made it worse was the tone. Leaders wagged their fingers, strutted with moral superiority, and acted as if only they had the map to justice. But it wasn't inclusion, it was exclusion. A party that claimed to represent everyone was, in reality, dividing the country into the enlightened and the ignorant. Millions felt shut out.
All you have to do is ask my father, who literally was shot in the Orangeburg Massacre, right? Who helped found SNCC, who marched with Marion Barry and Stokely Carmichael and Martin Luther King, and the list goes on and on and on. And he will tell you today that he feels like this country's at 1954. And so if you want to talk about somebody...
That doesn't mean it is. Well, you said he feels that way. That's ridiculous.
It became clear why so many Americans had stopped showing up at the polls. The constant lectures, the smug certainty, the air of superiority. It didn't inspire, it repelled. Instead of healing, it deepened the divisions, leaving the country more fractured than before. The spark reignited when one speaker brought race back to the forefront. He told a deeply personal story. His father, shot in the Orangeburg Massacre, had marched alongside civil rights leaders in the 1960s. His point was forceful. America hadn't changed. In his eyes, the nation stood no better off than it had been in 1954. But pushback came immediately. Critics called the comparison outrageous. How could anyone seriously claim that America in 2024 was the same as Alabama in the 1950s? Women vote in record numbers. Women hold leadership roles in Congress. They run Fortune 500 companies. And the sitting vice president is a woman of color. The narrative of a nation stuck in the past simply didn't align with reality.
I cannot talk about it because I am not part of a group. I am a sentient human being. You're right. There's 2 ways you cannot understand something. One is to be too far from it. We're too far from it. We can't see like you can. One is to be too close to something. And then sometimes you can't see it accurately either.
America had, in fact, elected 2 black presidents. To act as if nothing had changed was not only misleading, it was dishonest. Progress was undeniable, even if problems remained. The real function of denying it was to intimidate, to paint dissenters as though they secretly longed for the dark past. But the weight of that denial was heavy. To dismiss America's growth was to insult those who had bled and struggled to make it possible. This was why the moment mattered. It exposed a familiar tactic, using historical pain as a weapon in the present, even when the evidence contradicted the narrative. The guest, still leaning on his father's story, argued his suffering could never be minimized. No one dared deny it, yet critics countered sharply. Comparing the brutality of the 1950s to modern America was a distortion. One analogy hit hard, claiming America today was no better than Jim Crow Alabama was, like insisting Jews in 1939 lived no differently than Jews today. The exaggeration spoke for itself. Modern reality is different. Black Americans now hold positions once unthinkable. Mayors, governors, senators, CEOs, billionaires, twice the Oval Office itself. That isn't symbolic. It's history being written in real time. And yet, some voices cling to the old script. Why? Because entire careers, industries, and fortunes are built on the narrative of endless oppression. Outrage sells, media slots, book deals, speaking tours. The moment the story shifts to one of progress, the business model collapses. That's why failure is amplified while victories are muted. It was never about reflecting reality. It was about protecting a grievance economy. And in that instant, something unspoken became undeniable. Despite the fact that admitting it doesn't pay, there is improvement. And that truth became impossible to ignore as the debate wound down. The entire exchange exposed a dangerous pattern. Slogans, race baiting, and moral posturing were being placed above honesty, progress, and solutions. Over and over, the same tired words replaced action, corporations staging symbolic gestures, politicians blaming sexism for every defeat, activists pretending America is frozen in 1954. But when families face rising grocery bills, crime in their neighborhoods, and border insecurity, these diversions feel hollow. Progress has happened. 2 Black presidents, women in Congress, CEOs of color, opportunities unthinkable decades ago, denying that insults those who fought for change, all to preserve a grievance-driven narrative that sells outrage but fixes nothing. The mask slipped. Rhetoric can't solve real problems. And the public, tired of lectures, is tuning out. The audience for this performance is shrinking fast.